Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, there were a bunch of fights yesterday. Let me just talk about some performances that caught my eye. Now, let me just say, one of the best bits of advice I've ever received in my life was that you don't have to know someone to have that person be a mentor to you. In other words, in this day and age of internet video, video on demand, etc., right, you can literally research people. See the mistakes they made, see what they're doing right, see how you can lift your game. Now at light heavyweight, you have a fighter, Anthony Yarde. He's unbeaten. I have his latest fight against Chris Hobbs in my favorites folder here online. Now this guy is promising, explosive puncher. You can tell too that he, more times than not, in fact most of the time, is going to be the better athlete in the ring. Right? The guy moves awfully well. He's episodic. Right? He can go from 0 to 60. He seems to have certain tools that suggest that he, if he works on it, could develop a great jab. Right? If he works on it, he could actually move around the pocket and be harder to hit a lot better. Right? Now, let me just say this. I want YouTube Nation here to break down his film on their own. Just watch the film in my favorites folder here. But what I want this young man to do is to look at the guys at the top. Let me name two of them. Now this guy's an explosive puncher. He's getting by on explosive punching. Right? Let's name two explosive punchers in his division, light heavyweight, who are already on the world stage. Right? People need to realize that Adonis Stevenson's straight left hand is one of boxing's best punches. It puts people to sleep. It knocks people down. Keep in mind, Adonis Stevenson already went right through Tony Bellew. Right? Adonis Stevenson, there were tough moments, but he beat Andres Fonfara, who was on the canvas in that fight. Right? Stevenson, of course, famously knocked out Chad Dawson early. Right? When Stevenson gets that left hand on you, it's good night, Irene. He is the light heavyweight version of Manny Pacquiao. Same fight style. Dances around, is outside. You know, throw some perfunctory jabs, then suddenly, boom, comes in with the hammer. And it is a hammer. What I want Anthony Yarde to realize is Stevenson's wearing a belt that Yarde isn't wearing. Stevenson moves around the ring a lot more than Anthony Yarde, and this is with explosive power. And Stevenson actually uses a jab to set up his left hand. In other words, at the world-class level, you can't just walk in and assume, look, I'm the better athlete, I have the bigger punch, I'll just walk this guy down. Right? That's not the way it works, even when you have big punching power. Let's name another guy in the division with explosive punching power, and that's Sergey Kovalev. But what people need to realize is, what I want Anthony Yarde to realize, looking at Kovalev's films, is that Kovalev has one of the best jabs in boxing. Right? He's hitting you with a 2x4, keeping you at bay before he takes you out. In other words, as he's coming forward on his front foot, he's not just relying on blood and guts to come forward on his front foot. No, he's creating space with that jab. Right? This is even with the prodigious punching power. So Yarde has the punching power part down. He has the athletic part down. I understand he didn't have a big amateur career. He's learning the sport as a pro. Good for him. It just underlines how exceptional this guy's talent is. But he needs to look at the way Adonis Stevenson moves. He needs to look at the way Kovalev sets the table with that jab. Keeps people at the range at which he wants them. Right? In other words, Anthony Yarde, as unbeaten as he is, as impressed as I am by the guy's athleticism, right, needs to model himself after the great fighters in his division, right, to hone his craft. Let's shift to another performance. A fighter who I consider great. I once made a video here. It was a list of the 5 guys I thought were the best pound for pound. And right after I made the video, one of the first comments was someone who said, what about Inoue? Right? And I thought, damn, how did I miss him? Now this guy's nickname is Monster. His punch is that big. Right? Pound for pound, he's one of the hardest punchers in the sport of boxing. He fought this weekend against a very game Ricardo Rodriguez. What you'll notice, and I want Anthony Yarde to look at this, is that here you had a guy with a big punch. And guess what he does? He's on his back foot. He's reading angles for much of the first round. Right? He's figuring out the things he can do. Then you know what happens, right? He gets off his back foot. Eventually he gets on his front foot, throws a couple of hard left hands, and that's the end of the fight. Right? That's the end of the fight. I believe that fight's over in the 3rd round. Right? My point again is, here you have a guy whose nickname is Monster. Very high KO percentage. Champion. Right? And he's in the ring figuring out angles on his back foot. He has a back foot game. Kitchen gets too hot, he jumps out of it. Right? If the guy follows him, he can handle himself on his back foot. Again, I want Anthony Yarde to look hard at other guys in the sport with big punching power who have actually developed games around the punching power. By the way, I have the Inoue fight, and it's a must-see in my favorites folder here as well. I hope you give it a look. Now, this weekend's best performance arguably goes to Gervonta Davis. Right? There's a component to that fight where he's fighting on foreign soil. He's dealing with the crowd. He's up against an opponent who I still feel is more athletic than him. Right? And Davis was focused and delivered. But his performance wasn't the only great performance this weekend. You might recall at 168 pounds, right? Super middleweight, right between middleweight and light heavy. You might recall that James DeGale, after being warned by Badu Jack about Porky Medina, actually fought Porky Medina and had a hell of a hard time in that fight, right? He ends the fight with his face swollen. Medina's giving him all kinds of problems. Medina's a shorter guy with a big punch and an even bigger heart, right? Medina's a guy who's going to test you. He's going to challenge you in the pocket. Well, Medina fought a name you need to know. David Benavidez. This guy is 20 years old. 20 years old. Only one of his fights have gone the distance. This guy has big-time punching power. But more importantly, and you'll notice the difference in Anthony Yarde and Benavidez. Benavidez hits hard, but he actually throws combinations. right? He throws combinations. Let me say this too. You're going to see one of the best uppercuts in boxing. And yes, it belongs to a 20-year-old. And he starts throwing combinations involving uppercuts against Porky Medina, and he takes him out. And you're going to notice Medina, a guy with a chin, right? A guy who went the distance with DeGale, right? You're going to notice Porky Medina could not go the distance with David Benavidez, right? This is a young guy on the rise. Boxing is a young man's game. You need to brace yourself for the next generation. You think Gervonta Davis is young at 22 or whatever he is? Well, what about this kid at 20? Let me say, too, that I believe there's going to be eventually a passing of the torch at 168 pounds, right? I did not like Andre Dirrell's fight against Jose Uzcategui, right? I didn't like it. Let me say this. I know Jose gets disqualified, right? I agree with the disqualification. He had been warned about punches after the bell earlier in the fight, and then, of course, he drops Andre Dirrell on a punch after the bell in a different round, and the ref wasn't having it, right? If you're a fighter, the burden's on you, especially after a warning, not to hit an opponent after the bell. Let me also point out, too, that with 10 seconds left in the round, these guys get a warning, right? There's a little sound, you know, something hitting wood, that fighters hear with 10 seconds left in the round, so there's no excuse as to why you would be hitting a guy after the bell. Let me also say, the burden's on the fighter to listen for the bell. I don't like these guys who say, I never heard the bell, when everybody else in the arena hears the bell. As you're looking at the film, you hear the bell, right? So he should have been disqualified. But understand, he was winning the fight on the judges' scorecards at the time of the disqualification. Think about that. Andre Dirrell was getting outboxed. Also, I know people are going to be blinded by the official result. They'll say, oh, Andre Dirrell won that fight. Make no mistake, Andre Dirrell got knocked out. I don't even believe he's faking, folks, because you don't hit the canvas like that if you're faking. If you're faking, you make sure you get a hand down so your head doesn't hit the canvas in some awkward position that hurts your neck too, right? Andre Dirrell doesn't get a hand down. There's nothing to break his fall. He hits the canvas like a sack of potatoes. Now, I'm just telling you, there are those who, when they see a fighter knocked out, they're going to say, you know what, I'm not taking that guy in his next fight, right? Because it takes a while to get back in the saddle. And, of course, this fight was an elimination fight for the right to fight James DeGale, who's already beaten Andre Dirrell, right? So, to me, Andre Dirrell getting outboxed, getting knocked out, I would take David Benavidez over Andre Dirrell. I don't believe Andre Dirrell really is a credible opponent for James DeGale. I'll even go further. That first DeGale-Dirrell fight, understand, that was in Boston. That was in the United States. Now you're telling me that Andre Dirrell presumably is going to travel to the United Kingdom to fight James DeGale in his first fight after getting knocked out? A fight where the guy wasn't winning on the scorecards and didn't get the knockout. Right? To me, that's troubling. Let me also say this too. Different fight. I have the highlights in my comment section here online, right? I believe Terrence Crawford at least proved to me that he's the best fighter in the sport pound for pound. Right? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a little sore on that fight because I had the over in the fight, and I have no idea how at the end of 10 rounds, Felix Diaz's corner, Joel Diaz, decides to pull the plug on a fight where his guy was still upright wasn't cut. Yes, his eyes were swollen, but I didn't get the feeling he was on the verge of being knocked out. I know he had a bad 10th round, but isn't this the one shot that he has at the title? What's he doing quitting in the corner? Or how could the corner throw in the towel? That was a little bit curious to me, right? Second time it's happened to me this year. I had the opponent, Jason Sosa, in the Vasyl-Lomachenko fight, same type thing. You're 90 seconds away from the over, and suddenly the corner throws in the towel, right? But be that as it may, as you look at that film, I believe all of these young guys, all of them, right, with a lot of talent, Shakur Stevenson, for example, I believe these guys need to be watching Terence Crawford fights. First, just understand that Crawford is a Swiss Army knife. Like Tyson Fury, Crawford is completely ambidextrous, right? He can fight you lefty the entire fight. He can fight you righty the entire fight. Crawford can fight you on his back foot, right? That's Crawford moving away from Victor Postal. Crawford can fight you on his front foot. And what's interesting with Crawford is Crawford seems to be a master at many different aspects of the game. So against Diaz, he's on his front foot, he's cutting off the ring, he even drops his hands. Compare his hands in the Ricky Burns fight to his hands here. He drops his hands, adopts an open style, right? He's the guy who is calm in the middle of the storm, right? He's calm in front of Felix Diaz. Granted, he's not a puncher, but he's still an Olympic gold medalist. And Crawford is picking his spots. He can jab you to death. He could lead with power punches, right? Crawford also, unlike Gary Russell, and I have the Gary Russell fight in my favorites folder here from this weekend against Oscar Escandon, right? Gary Russell, better athlete, well, has certain athletic skills that Crawford doesn't have, right? Gary Russell is blessed with blinding hand speed, right? We can have an argument on whether Manny Pacquiao's hand speed is faster or slower than Gary Russell's. Let's just agree both are in the conversation. But what's interesting with Gary Russell is Gary Russell's around the pocket. Gary Russell can actually get hit by guys with slower hands. You'll notice in the Terence Crawford fight, Crawford's landing all kinds of counters. Now think about it. Crawford's enough in the pocket to land counters. But yet you'll notice Felix Diaz can't find Crawford. Crawford's defense is such that he's always a little bit off at the side, right? His timing is such that he's able to hit you, but you can't hit him, even though he's countering you. Now, Gary Russell, God bless him, I know he wants to fight the best. He famously lost to Vasyl-Lomachenko. Russell claims he was dehydrated for the fight. He looked great in this fight. But Russell's a guy who's really relying on a fastball, isn't he? He has one competitive advantage, and that's his hand speed, and it is blinding, right? But you get the feeling that if his hands ever slow, there's not enough there to float the boat, at least not in championship waters. But yet with Terence Crawford, it's not about hand speed, right? It's, you know, Crawford's in that technician zone where it's just about his knowledge of the sport and his ability to execute, right? So put me among those. I'm not saying Crawford beats everyone. I believe style-wise he has a problem with Manny Pacquiao. I do believe that. I also wonder, Crawford's talking about going to 147. I wonder if physically he'd be able to hang with Keith Thurman, right? That's Keith Thurman's domain. Or with the winner of Spence Kell Brook, right? If Kell Brook sticks around 147. But make no mistake, I mean, pound for pound, at 140 there's one king. And that's Terrence Crawford, right? And technique-wise, style-wise, you know, the ability to just switch techniques when the circumstances dictate it. This is a guy who is really standing alone. I would say just in terms of skill, Crawford's ahead of Golovkin. He's ahead of Lomachenko, right? He's ahead of Kovalev, right? He's ahead of Canelo, right? Crawford, great performance by Terrence Crawford. He couldn't stop Diaz. As we predicted, Diaz has a very tight defense, right? Diaz went several rounds with Crawford. But, wow, that was one of the weekend's most dominant performances, right? If the fight is at 140, you don't even have to know the opponent, right? Unless it's Manny Pacquiao. We'll have a special carve-out for Manny. I would say Terrence Crawford beats the opponent, right? I don't think Lomachenko is competitive against Terrence Crawford at 140. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.